Hello everybody, it's time for another episode of
Hadley's History.
In case you forgot, my name is Craig Hadley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Tippecanoe County Historical Association. And before we get to our very cool Artifact of the Week, I want to talk to you a little bit about something that came up in a phone conversation recently. I was talking to a friend on the phone recently, and he said something that just startled me. He said,
I hated history in school. It was the most boring subject ever.
"Say what? Au contraire, mon père. I mean, history is like the most exciting, coolest subject ever. I mean, it's got real life.
Heroes, villains, heroines, even worse villains, great mysteries, knights in shining armor, women in shining armor, cowboys and Indians, wars, pirates, gunslingers, women gunslingers, scientific discoveries, real-life magicians, and so much more.
And Tippecanoe County has a lot of that history. And we're going to be exploring that history in the weeks and months to come.
I tell you what, this week's artifact theme is the Civil War. So we're going to jump a little ahead here, and I'm going to go ahead and jump right into our recommended book of the week. Here we are. This week is going to be a doubleheader, because I'm going to recommend two books, just in case your preference lies one way or the other. The first is Company H, A Sideshow of the Big Show by Sam Watkins. Now, Sam was an actual private in the Army of the Tennessee, fighting in the Western Theater during the Civil War. And he has a lot of great stories about his adventures as a soldier and the battles he was in and camp life and everything else. So if you're into the Southern cause perspective, this is a great book to read, and it's a lot of fun, and it's not very long. The next book I want to recommend is All for the Union, The Civil War Diary and Letters of Elisha Hunt Rhodes. Now, Elisha Hunt Rhodes enlisted as a private in the 2nd Rhode Island Infantry. However, by the time he was 23 years old and near the end of the war, he'd risen all the way up to the rank of a lieutenant colonel. It's a riveting book and gives you a wonderful perspective of the Eastern theater of the war as told through the eyes of a young man. This is a great book I would highly recommend. These are both great reads, and I'd highly recommend reading both of them. You don't have to read just one or the other. In fact, if you read both, I'd be interested to see if it actually changes your perspective on the Civil War. It's now time for the Artifact of the Week.
This week's very cool Artifact of the Week is, of course, the model 1860 Spencer rifle. This beautiful example of that gun is on loan to us currently from the Hahn Museum, and we'd like to thank them for loaning us this very cool weapon to talk about today. It's got a very interesting history.
The model 1860 Spencer rifle was a .52 caliber lever-action rifle that fired a .56-56 brass rimfire cartridge.
This is very different from the muzzle-loading weapons that were the primary weapons of the American Civil War soldier. This was a giant leap forward. The great innovation of the Spencer rifle was how it was loaded and fired. As opposed to the primary Civil War weapons, which were muzzle-loading, which you poured the black powder down the front of the barrel and used a ramrod to tap it down before putting in the bullet, you would load and fire the Spencer rifle by basically going to the back of the rifle, and in the butt, you pulled out a spring-loaded tube, which you would put 7 cartridges into this tube, and then put it back into the rifle, open it up, you would cock it, inject a cartridge into the barrel, pull back, and it's ready to fire. Now, what's made this really interesting is, as opposed to the muzzle-loading weapons, which a good, well-trained soldier could use 3 rounds per minute he could fire from that rifle, you could fire 14 to 20 rounds a minute with the Spencer rifle. So what makes this rifle even more unique than the fact that it's a Spencer rifle? Well, I'll tell you. The serial numbers on this rifle indicate that it was likely issued to the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Regiment and could have potentially been in the Battle of Chickamauga. That's very cool. 72nd Indiana was part of Wilder's Lightning Brigade. The Spencer rifle was very much a favorite of Abraham Lincoln, as well as General Custer. These rifles were not ever issued in mass to the Federal troops, even though there was a push to do so. It would have very much changed the outcome of the war if they had. I'd like to thank Bob Hahn for the loan of that beautiful weapon. And if you've never been to the Hahn Museum, I would highly recommend you making a trip once the current crisis is over. It's beautiful with some amazing artwork and artifacts, and it's definitely one of Tippecanoe County's hidden treasures. Before we move on, I think we ought to have a little special preview of our Artifact of the Week for next week. Take a close look. What I'd like you to do is post on this thread of what type of artifact you think it is, and how do you think we date such an artifact? And now it's time for
History according to Hollywood.
This week, in keeping with our theme of the Civil War, I'd like to recommend a real classic. And that's the 1951 film adaptation of Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage. This is starring Audie Murphy and Bill Mauldin. The film is directed by legendary John Huston, who insisted that Audie Murphy play the principal part of the youth, even though the studios resisted it. However, Huston got his way. He wanted somebody who had a true 1,000-yard stare and had seen actual combat and death up close. Audie Murphy, of course, was the most highly decorated soldier of World War II, being only 19 and 20 years old when he did all those amazing feats of heroism that saved the lives of hundreds of men. Bill Mauldin co-stars in this film. It's only one of 3 films that he ever actually appeared in. Bill Mauldin was more famous for being the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the book Up Front, as he had been a war correspondent primarily in the Italy campaign during World War II. And he brings a really unique sense of humor to the role. Well, that's all the time we have today. But before you leave, make sure you click like if you enjoyed the show. And stay tuned for next week for another exciting episode of
Hadley's History.